Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this week's Halftime Talk feature interview, where we take a step back from our daily energy markets coverage midweek to take a deeper dive into some of the wider macro trends that are going on, of course, within the ecosystem. We're joined here today with our special guest speaker, Yong, who is the CEO of LNG EC Singapore. Thank you very much for joining the show.
Thank you, Brian. Pleasure to be here.
I just wanted to first get, from your perspective, a brief overview so our listeners and viewers understand of LNG EC and the role it plays, and of course, the services it offers.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I started in the shipping industry. I'm 30 years in shipping. LNG EC, I set up with a partner about 6 years ago. We are providing infrastructure solutions for LNG because we can see that the G2G system, big ship to big ship system, is up for radical change. So we would like to to distribute LNG to the most remote area of the world in the developing countries, and that's what we are set up for.
And in terms of that infrastructure, what are some of, if you can just dive a little bit deeper into that, the bottlenecks that you're seeing with LNG infrastructure, the solutions that are required, and how, like you said, radical change is coming to that market, of course, to reach the remote areas. Can you give an overview on that aspect?
Right. So basically, LNG is big business. In the oil terms, you can say that it has only infrastructure for VLCCs. So no infrastructure for Suezmax, for Aframax, for Panamax tanker, handy-size tanker, and so on. So, but this is inadequate because there's much more LNG now on the supply side, and there's a lot more users, smaller customers on the demand side. So we had to meet somewhere, and that's where we need a lot more infrastructure. So two aspects, right? One is that I believe we need a lot of intermediary storage, just like oil. In the oil business, there are a lot of tank farms everywhere in the world. In Singapore, we had a few hundred tanks as a intermediate storage for crude and product. And in LNG, there's nothing like that. So most storage is with the end consuming countries, which is not adequate when you try to redirect the cargo, breaking it up and sending it to the smaller customers. So that's number one. And number two is the receiving facility, because the main receiving facility today is either on land terminal or the big FSRUs. They're great for big consumers, typically connected with pipeline. But we believe, and we've seen that in China already, a lot of the consumers would like to get the LNG as a liquid, not as pipeline gas. So therefore, we are the first one. You can see the picture behind me. We create a liquid-to-liquid import terminal in Myanmar at a fraction of the cost of the other terminals. So that was about $10 million investment. We put it up in 4 months, basically. And then Myanmar can receive LNG, and we are sending the LNG to shore. And then, for onshore regasification, and also to parcel into a smaller truck size to be distributed. So basically, on the receiving end and on the intermediate storage side, there's more need for more infrastructure.
And what's your outlook in terms of the acceleration of that scale? Obviously, as you said, it's more cost effective, it's more efficient.
Yeah. So basically, LNG has been used by certain countries like Japan, Korea, Taiwan for power generation. But for various reasons, one of the reasons is decarbonization. The demand for fossil fuel as a power generation fuel is decreasing. However, LNG is very competitive. If you can replace diesel with it, or you can replace LPG. from emission point of view, CO2 point of view, and also from a non-CO2 pollution point of view. NOx, SOx, particulate matter, 1.0 or particulate matter 2.5, all these particles in the air which is harmful to human being. So you kind of, it has to be, the big customers are declining, like like Europe, Japan, Korea, because their power needs are down, and also they have needs to decarbonize. But all these different small customers in developing countries, they're using coal and diesel and so on. So that's I would say the golden opportunity for LNG. It has to happen.
And are you seeing increased buy-in? We're talking. Of course, COP28 is coming up. We're talking about greening LNG. Are you seeing customers aware of this? And obviously, that's a unique selling point right there. Is everyone has to be on this journey together? But are you seeing that overall in the understanding and pivot towards this area?
Absolutely. I think, in the maritime sector, you see a lot of push towards LNG as a marine fuel to replace whatever we are burning today. And then, there is also, for example, the cruise business. They love LNG as a fuel because not only from a GHG point of view, but from the non-CO2 pollution point of view, because the cruise cabin, the passengers inside, they don't want to have the NOx and SOx, right behind their nose, right? So that's where LNG is very popular, as a marine fuel, and we see that it's penetrating other shipping segments like PCTC, the fuel car carriers. They love LNG. The big liner companies, they love LNG. Because people like IKEA, they demand green fuel, and so many sectors of shipping, they will see an expansion of LNG as a fuel, and that's an example of a retail side, because you had the marine bunkering at sea, but you had also the transportation industry on land, which will evolve according to the same logic.
I just want to take a step back as well. The LNG market's really dynamic. But overall, I just wanted to get your overview on the increasing commoditization of LNG. It seems like there's a new kind of global gas world order at the moment. You still have Europe's imports of LNGs has increased pretty heavily over the past year. And then, of course, you have Russia still supplying gas via pipeline to China. How do you see that competition playing out between LNG, versus other options? What is your outlook in terms of competitors?
Obviously, if you can have pipeline gas, it's cheaper for any customer, right? But Europe made a decision to switch from more expensive LNG import over pipeline gas. They had their reasons. We don't need to go into that. But the gas has to go somewhere, and and obviously the Russian gas is being pushed heavily into China, and also the Middle Asian countries. So basically, China will become what Europe used to be. Europe is a price setter for the world. TTF index, because they had healthy competition between pipeline gas and LNG. However, if Europe is switching predominantly to an LNG supply profile, this road of price setting will be, given to China, because in China you will see fierce competition between LNG import and pipeline gas import, and also the domestic gas production. So you have three forces in China, which will be very, very important for the future. So we are, I think the world is probably underestimating a little bit the role of China, because everybody talks about China as a country, but but however, China was number one 2021 as an importer, but they gave that up to Japan. But going forward, China would be importing another maybe 50, 60 million tons. So it's going to be a very massive market. And, so China would become a price setter. And that's where it gets interesting, because China is a kind of marginal cost pricing market rather than a long-term, LNG to power market. So it would be very interesting, and we see a drive for further commoditization of LNG because of that.
Just on that signal, why do you think China is being underestimated in this aspect, in terms of overall downstream sector traders and so forth?
I think, basically, it's a natural progression. I mean, if you remember iron ore in the early 2000, what it was, I mean, Japan was predominant player, and the pricing rules are set by Japan. Now, I think China is 5 times Japan in terms of iron ore import, right? So that's a kind of one commodity. If you look at coal, it's kind of the same. China was self-sufficient with domestic production, but then it kind of imported an insane amount of coal, and now it's the largest import market for coal. So I mean, it's just China is just big, So it would, most people would come to that, they would realize, okay, wow, we would try to, serve the Chinese market, because it's going to be a few times bigger than, for example, Japan was before. Yeah.
I just want to get your outlook for storage as well. You have underground storage, as you said, you have the receiving aspect as well. Where do you see that evolving more so, from, let's say, larger countries and larger stakeholders?
Yeah. Where I said, now there's a lot of LNG storage in the onshore tanks in Korea, Japan, China. And then in Europe and US, predominantly they're using UGS, underground gas storage. However, the issue with this kind of storage is that, you're not free to arbitrage, because, you want to keep the cargo in an LNG form, so you can ship it out. So that's number one. And number two, you want the LNG to be tax protected. So it can, because if you're going to do, if LNG trading is converging to crude oil trading, you will see a lot more crisscrossing of the world. Somebody can receive a cargo, keep it for 2 months, and then it would, be redirected to, it can be a Russian cargo. You take it from Rotterdam, the storage coming to, Singapore, store for 2 months, and it can go back to Europe, right? So for this kind of trade to happen, everything based on arbitrage, spot market driven pattern, you need a lot more intermediate storage in neutral locations, and also tax protected. So that's something like Gibraltar or the Roe of Spain in the European system. And that will, these kind of locations will emerge in Asia, I believe.
I just wanted to also touch on the price aspect. We're seeing, let's say, more demand versus supply. What is your outlook? We've had very high prices. It's kind of been rocky coming down as well. What is your outlook, of course, for 2023, let's say over the medium term, for price stability?
Yeah, I think maybe this winter we'll get into a tight situation again, because there's, I mean, it's some uncertainty there. However, I think, most people expect the market will loosen 2025 or 2026. My expectation is that it will loosen a bit earlier, because, if Europe is, I mean, Europe doesn't have a storage problem. Europe has a very vast underground gas storage, and they are developing very rapidly on the renewable electricity generation side. So gas is the perfect backup for renewables. So Europe, theoretically, they can manage. I mean, what happened last year was the bottleneck in the regas capacity, which doesn't exist anymore because of all these FSRU terminals that Europe has put in. And I think, the drive towards more renewable in Europe is very determined. Nobody can turn it back, even though people criticize, but they will continue. So, like in Germany, you see rules that forbid gas connections to new buildings. only heat pumps. That's a kind of, for example. So Europe is making a very determined effort. So I don't think, barring this winter, maybe from next year onwards, it would be quite relaxed. And for China, the new pipeline gas arrival will start next year. So I think maybe we had a tight period this winter, but beyond that, I would expect a kind of relatively loose environment, which is good for developing countries, by the way.
At GI, we kind of like to talk about unknown unknowns, let's say. So, of course, you have the gas pipeline situation with Europe, and we're looking at geopolitical risk with Russia. But of course, those imports of LNG have increased, pretty dramatically, let's say, or have increased pretty high. Do you see that that's somewhat of a geopolitical risk in those imports going into winter, and of course, coming back into a possible switch to what happened, let's say, last year? They're focusing on the shift towards energy transition, but at the same time, there's still some aspect with LNG imports there.
Well, I mean, I think today the storage level in Europe is maybe, I think 55% or something like that, right? And the European government said, by November, it needs to be 90%. I think at 90%, you're quite safe. Europe is quite safe. Yeah. So, I mean, unless there's, also the last year's high prices are also partly caused by the outage in Freeport, right? So, that took a lot of capacity of the market. So, touch wood, this would not happen. So all the liquefaction plants would run as they should. And I don't really see that we had another crisis. Maybe the market will be tight, but it won't be a crisis. That's my expectation.
So more noise, if anything, but not actual substance, if that's the case. I just
That's
wanted
my
to kind of,
expectation.
yeah, it's hard to keep up with some headlines today. There's always something that's popping up on your notifications and phone. I just kind of wanted to go back. Of course, energy transition versus energy security. Again, we talked on greening LNG a bit. But again, to get your insights a little bit more on the bio LNG aspects, and if you can kind of explain that in a little bit more detail. It's now starting to, of course, impact energy markets, and as you said, from Asia to Europe to the Middle East to the Americas, it's very much a focus, and you have to move now, right? You have to, or you get left behind. Can you just dive a little bit more into that aspect?
I think Europe again is leading the world when it comes to bio side of things, and the biogas, compress the biomethane, and then bio LNG. So Europe is doing very well, leading the world. But they're sizable amount. I mean, I heard figures like 11 million tons if you utilize most of the feedstocks in Europe.
Wow.
The biomass feedstock. So it's Pakistan imports like 9 million, right? So 11 million is a sizable amount. I think in Asia we are not so lucky because
what would be the target or the KPI to achieve the level that you think it should get to in a certain amount of time?
I mean, KPI in terms of production volume.
Yeah, because we're having, for example, COP28, His Excellency Sultan Al Jaber. We're not making enough progress. We're behind on reaching our Paris Agreement targets. What is the goal that we're trying to achieve in that space from your perspective?
I think we should go bio as much as possible because we follow the new fuels like hydrogen, ammonia, which is a hydrogen carrier, and then we follow methanol and so on. And the electricity to X type of business. I must conclude that all these are quite far away from in terms of cost from biogas, bio LNG. Bio LNG is maybe today's market 2.5 times the cost of fossil. But the other fuels that we just discussed, when it comes to genuinely green, like green hydrogen, green methanol, these kind of things, the cost is a lot higher than the number that I just cited. So I think we should go full force on bio, and produce as much as we can, and then we come back and then look at the other fuels, which are either from renewables or from nuclear. So yeah, I mean, so I think Asia should catch up with the efforts in Europe. Asia has potential. Our price environment is not so good because our pipeline gas price is too low and whatever, too not inducive enough for a very serious effort at making biogas from biomass feedstock. But this should change. All the government should come in and to help, because this is one bird at hand. Because all the other birds are the birds in the forest. One bird at hand is better than 10 in the forest. So you can talk about all these things, CCUS, green methanol, producing green hydrogen in Australia, put it on a ship and sending it to Japan at very, very high cost. These are birds in the forest. I mean, you can do experiment with it, but the LNG is really, really, something that we should work very hard on.
In terms of cost, I mean, you had reports and analysis coming out in terms of solar back in the day, right? Cost reduction. I think that was proven wrong, and I think that can still be the same way from the bio aspect. We're actually just coming up on 20 minutes. This actually goes by pretty fast. But I just wanted to first thank you again, but also give you the opportunity for closing comments. Your outlook for the year ahead, in terms of LNG, kind of what are the tea leaves that you're looking at in terms of moving to the market? Of course, I thought remote areas was an amazing aspect, and it's crucial and important. The signals that you think will come up over the course of the rest of the year.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I'm wishing for a low price, because the world depends on. If you look at all the tools for decarbonization, coal to gas conversion is the single biggest impactful event. You put all the rest together, maybe 10 of them, EV and so on, is not as impactful as coal to gas conversion. So I hope everybody, especially the coal intensive countries, had a chance to use LNG, in the years ahead, and we are working hard to make that happen too. So,
a critical aspect in energy security portfolio, a main pillar. But thank you very much, Yong. I appreciate your time today. Of course, those who are listening and watching, please feel free to follow LNG EC on social media, and of course, Gulf Intelligence, where you'll be able to see this interview live and when published, and of course, content harvested from it as well moving forward. But thank you again very much for your time. We appreciate your insights. Time goes by pretty fast, but I think we touched on a lot of aspects, and we look forward to having you and your colleagues again on the show in the future.
Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure. Thank you.